My name is Stephen Alexander. Travis was my big brother. I was sleeping in after working a 12-hour graveyard shift in the Army. Woke up to the sound of my wife crying, walking up the stairs. I'll never forget what she said. Samantha, I cannot tell him. You have to.
Okay, what did you say? I'm sorry.
So why don't we just talk for a little bit about happy things and get normalized for a moment, and we'll see where it takes us.
We'll see where it takes us. I like that. I like to get happy and get normalized part.
Kick your shoes off, and get happy.
A digital camera is meant to capture memories. This one held a murder. In the summer of 2008, in a quiet suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, a successful 30-year-old man named Travis Alexander was found brutally killed in his own home. The crime scene was a tableau of savage violence, but the most important clue wasn't found in the blood spatter or the shell casing. It was found in the washing machine, where his killer had tried, and failed, to erase the truth. The images recovered from that camera would become a silent, unblinking witness, documenting the final, intimate moments of a man's life, and the horrific aftermath. They would point to a single suspect, his beautiful, charismatic ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias. What followed was not just an investigation, but the unraveling of a story of obsession, deception, and faith. It would culminate in one of the most sensationalized and divisive trials in American history, a trial that transformed a personal tragedy into a national spectacle, and forced a country to ask itself where the line between justice and entertainment truly lies. The story begins not with a murder, but with an absence. On the evening of Wednesday, June 4th, 2008, Travis Alexander, a 30-year-old motivational speaker living in Mesa, Arizona, missed an important conference call for work. For a man known for his ambition and meticulous professionalism, it was an uncharacteristic lapse, a small tear in the fabric of a carefully ordered life. In the days that followed, a silence grew. Calls went to voicemail, the mailbox filling until it could take no more. Text messages went unanswered. His friends, scattered across the country but connected by a tight-knit social and religious circle, began to worry. By Monday, June 9th, 5 days after anyone had last heard from him, the worry had curdled into a quiet dread. A small group of his friends decided to go to his house on North Queen Creek Road. They knew he lived with 2 roommates, but when they arrived, no one answered the door. They knew the code to the garage keypad, a small act of trust that would soon lead them into a nightmare. They let themselves in, calling his name. The house was still. One of his roommates was home but hadn't seen Travis in days, assuming, like everyone else, that he was simply out of town on business. The friends made their way upstairs to his master bedroom. The door was locked. After finding a key, they pushed it open, and the sterile quiet of the suburban home was shattered. The first thing they saw was blood, large, dark pools of it staining the hallway carpet, leading from the bedroom toward the master bathroom. Following the trail with a growing sense of horror, they found him. Travis Alexander was crumpled in the shower stall, his body already in a state of decomposition in the Arizona heat. The scene was one of almost unimaginable violence. One of the friends immediately dialed 911, his voice trembling with shock and grief. In a recording of that call, a piece of raw, unfiltered evidence the jury would never be permitted to hear, the dispatcher asked a standard, procedural question. Was there anyone who might have been angry enough to hurt him? Without hesitation, his friend spoke a single name, Jodi Arias. They told the dispatcher that Travis himself had warned them about her, that she had been stalking him, slashing his tires, and hacking into his social media accounts. Before any formal investigation had begun, before a single piece of forensic evidence had been collected, the victim's own friends, in their first moments of anguish, had identified his killer. When the Mesa Police Department arrived, the scene that greeted them was a paradox of chaos and control. It was a sight of extreme, frenzied violence, yet there were clear signs of a deliberate, if clumsy, attempt to clean it up. Blood had been wiped from the floors, and linens had been laundered. Detective Esteban Flores, the lead investigator, would later describe it as one of the most brutal crime scenes he had ever encountered in his career. The forensic processing of the house would take 4 full days, a meticulous effort to peel back the layers of the crime and uncover the objective truth of what happened in that bathroom. The first story was told by the victim's body. Dr. Kevin Horn, the Maricopa County medical examiner, performed the autopsy, and his findings painted a picture of a desperate, savage struggle. Travis Alexander had been stabbed 27 times. The wounds were scattered across his body, many of them shallow, suggesting a frantic, prolonged attack. There were defensive wounds on his hands, proof that he had fought for his life. The most catastrophic injury was to his throat. It had been slit with such force that the blade severed his jugular vein, his common carotid artery, and his trachea. The official cause of death was exsanguination. He had bled to death from the horrific knife wounds. But that wasn't all. There was also a single gunshot wound to his forehead from a .25 caliber weapon. Dr. Horn testified that this final act of violence may have been inflicted after Travis was already dead or dying, a chilling exclamation point on a sentence of brutality. The sheer overkill of the attack, the combination of dozens of stab wounds, a slit throat, and a gunshot, spoke not of a simple act of violence, but of a deep and personal rage. Back at the house, the forensic team, led by specialists like Heather Connor of the Latent Print Unit, continued their work. And the evidence they uncovered began to tell a second, more specific story. On a wall in the hallway, just outside the bathroom, they found a bloody palm print. It was a perfect, damning piece of evidence. DNA analysis would later confirm that the blood was a mixture from 2 people, Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias. It was an irrefutable physical link, placing her at the scene of the murder, her hand literally stained with his blood. Elsewhere in the bathroom, investigators found a single spent shell casing from a .25 caliber firearm. The caliber matched that of a handgun that had been reported stolen from the home of Jodi Arias' grandparents in California just 1 week before the murder, a crime the prosecution would later argue she had staged herself to obtain the weapon. But the most crucial piece of evidence, the item that would elevate this case from a tragic domestic homicide to a national obsession, was found in the laundry room. Submerged in the drum of the washing machine was a digital camera. The killer had tried to destroy it, to wash away its memory. But the attempt failed. Forensic experts were able to recover the deleted images from the camera's memory card, and what they found was a silent, time-stamped narrative of Travis Alexander's final hours. The recovered photos began at approximately 1:40 p.m. on June 4th. They were sexually suggestive images of Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander, a private, intimate record of their afternoon together. The timeline then jumped forward. The final photograph of Travis Alexander alive was taken at 5:29 p.m. In the image, he is standing in the shower, looking directly at the camera, vulnerable and unaware of what was about to happen. It is a haunting final portrait. The photos taken moments later are a chaotic blur of violence and horror. They capture Travis's body on the bathroom floor, profusely bleeding, in what appear to be accidental shots taken in the frenzy of the attack or its immediate aftermath. The camera also captured an image of a sock-covered foot, which investigators believed to be Arias's, and another showing Travis's body being dragged or moved across the floor. The camera had become the crime's single most important witness. It did more than just place Jodi Arias at the scene. It provided an objective, unblinking timeline that would systematically dismantle every lie she was about to tell. It recorded the transition from intimacy to murder in the space of a few digital files. It was the digital witness that could not be cross-examined, could not be intimidated, and could not be made to change its story. With this mountain of forensic evidence, the DNA, the palm print, the ballistics, and the damning photographic timeline, the Mesa Police Department had its suspect. The objective, scientific story was complete. On July 9, 2008, her 28th birthday, a grand jury indicted Jodi Arias on charges of first-degree murder. She was arrested at her home in California 6 days later. The machinery of justice had begun to turn, but the subjective, human story, a story of manipulation, performance, and profound deception, was just about to begin. The forensic evidence recovered from Travis Alexander's home told a clear, objective, and brutal story. But when investigators brought Jodi Arias in for questioning, they were confronted with a different kind of evidence: the malleable, self-serving, and ultimately contradictory evidence of the human voice. Over the next 2 years, Arias would present not one, but 3 entirely different versions of what happened on June 4th, 2008. Each story was a carefully constructed mask, worn to fit the circumstances and discarded as soon as the evidence rendered it useless. The first face of Jodi Arias was one of complete and total denial. During her initial interrogations with Detective Esteban Flores, she was a picture of calm cooperation, a concerned ex-girlfriend trying to help solve the murder of a man she once loved. She flatly denied being anywhere near Mesa on the day of the murder. She insisted her last contact with Travis had been months earlier, in March of 2008. She was 1,000 miles away, a world away, from the violence that had taken his life. It was a simple, clean lie, designed to erect an impenetrable wall of distance between herself and the crime. But it was a wall built on sand. As Detective Flores continued to question her, the forensic truth was already washing it away. The bloody palm print, the DNA, and the digital camera were not just evidence. They were anchors to reality, pulling her back to the scene she claimed she never visited. Confronted with the irrefutable proof of her presence, her own handprint in the victim's blood on the hallway wall, Arias was forced to abandon her first mask. The denial was no longer tenable. And so, the second face of Jodi Arias emerged, the face of a fellow victim. This was not just a story told in the sterile confines of an interrogation room. This was a narrative she took on a national media tour. In interviews with programs like Inside Edition and 48 Hours, she presented a new, elaborate, and terrifying version of events. In this telling, she was present at the murder, but only as a horrified witness. She claimed that she and Travis had been the victims of a home invasion, attacked by 2 masked intruders, a man and a woman. She described a chaotic and terrifying struggle in which the intruders brutally murdered Travis. And then, in a detail that strained credulity, she claimed that these vicious killers, for reasons she could not explain, simply decided to let her go. She was a survivor, a lucky escapee. When asked why she never called the police, why she didn't scream for help, she had an answer ready. She was terrified the killers would return to murder her as well. It was a performance of trauma, a public plea for sympathy. She was recasting herself from perpetrator to a secondary victim, a woman silenced by fear. But while Arias was constructing this elaborate fiction for the cameras, investigators were uncovering a parallel story, a story of cold, calculated premeditation. This story didn't begin on the day of the murder, but a week earlier, on May 28, 2008. On that day, a .25 caliber handgun was reported stolen from the Eureka, California, home of Arias's grandparents, where she was living at the time. The prosecution would later argue that this was no random crime, but a staged burglary, orchestrated by Arias herself to obtain the very weapon she would use to shoot Travis Alexander. The gun was never found, but the shell casing recovered from the crime scene was a perfect match. The planning continued. On June 2nd, just 2 days before the murder, Arias rented a blue Ford Focus in Redding, California. To conceal her long drive to Arizona, she took careful precautions. She turned off her cell phone for long stretches of the journey, creating a digital black hole where her location could not be tracked. She also purchased several gas cans, filling them with fuel before she left. This allowed her to avoid using her credit card at gas stations along the desolate highways between California and Arizona. A simple but effective way to erase the electronic breadcrumbs that would have documented her trip. These were not the actions of a woman about to be caught up in a random, violent attack. They were the meticulous preparations of someone on a covert mission. Her actions in the hours and days after the murder were just as calculated. On June 5th, the day after she killed Travis, she drove from Arizona to West Jordan, Utah, a suburb of Salt Lake City. Her destination was the home of Ryan Burns, another man with whom she had a romantic interest. She was there to attend a business conference, to see him, and most importantly, to create an alibi. Burns would later testify that Arias acted completely normal during their time together. She was calm, friendly, and seemingly carefree. But he did notice 2 peculiar details: Her hair, which had been blonde, was now dyed a dark brown, a simple but effective way to alter her appearance. And she had cuts on her hands. When Burns asked about them, Arias had a story ready. She claimed she had injured herself on broken glass while working at a Margaritaville restaurant. A detective would later testify that no such restaurant existed anywhere near her home or work. It was another small, disposable lie in a growing architecture of deceit. Before leaving Utah, in a final, chilling act of stagecraft, Arias made several phone calls to Travis Alexander's cell phone, leaving multiple voicemails for the man she knew was dead. She also accessed his voicemail system, presumably to delete any incriminating messages she may have left in the days leading up to the murder. When she finally returned the rental car in California on June 7th, it had been driven approximately 2,800 miles in just 5 days. A rental clerk testified that the car was missing its floor mats and had red stains on the seats, though the car was cleaned before police could examine them. For 2 years, Arias clung to the intruder story. But as the trial approached, and as the mountain of forensic and circumstantial evidence against her grew, the story became untenable. The prosecution had the premeditation. They had the timeline. They had her DNA at the scene. The intruder fantasy was a fiction that could not withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. And so, in August of 2010, nearly 2 years after her arrest, Jodi Arias shed her second mask and revealed her third and final face, the face of a victim of abuse. She now admitted for the first time that she had killed Travis Alexander. But she claimed it was not murder. It was self-defense. She alleged that Travis had a long and secret history of domestic violence, that he was emotionally, sexually, and physically abusive. She claimed that on June 4th, he had attacked her in a violent rage after she dropped his new camera, and that she was forced to kill him to save her own life. The lies about her involvement were now explained away as the product of shame and trauma, the panicked reactions of a battered woman who had been pushed too far. This was the story she would take to the stand. It was her last, most desperate performance. The complete denial had been shattered by forensics. The intruder story had been dismantled by logic and evidence of premeditation. All that was left was an attack on the character of the man she had killed. The stage was now set. On January 2nd, 2013, opening arguments began in the murder trial of Jodi Arias. The prosecution was armed with the immutable truth of science and a clear, documented pattern of deception. The defense was armed with one final, explosive story. The three faces of Jodi Arias were about to converge, and a jury would be asked to decide which, if any, was real. The trial of the state of Arizona versus Jodi Arias was never just a legal proceeding. From the moment the cameras were allowed inside the Maricopa County courtroom, it transformed into something else entirely. A cultural phenomenon, a real-life soap opera broadcast live into the homes of millions. The Associated Press would call it a circus and a runaway train that grew into a worldwide sensation. Cable networks like HLN saw their ratings soar, building entire programs like HLN After Dark around the daily testimony and even constructing a replica of the crime scene bathroom to reenact the murder. The case had all the elements of a dark, addictive drama: sex, lies, religion, and a brutal, intimate murder. The public was captivated, and the line between citizen and spectator, between justice and entertainment, began to dissolve. The central conflict of the trial was a war of narratives. The prosecution, led by the aggressive and theatrical Deputy County Attorney Juan Martinez, presented a story of cold, calculated premeditation. He argued that this was a murder born of jealousy, a final, possessive act by a woman who could not stand to be rejected. The defense, led by public defenders L. Kirk Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot, countered with a story of terror and abuse. They argued that Jodi Arias was not a monster, but a battered woman who had killed in a desperate act of self-defense. The star witness for the defense was the defendant herself. In a move that legal experts called unprecedented for a capital murder case, Jodi Arias took the witness stand for 18 consecutive days. For nearly 3 weeks, she held the courtroom and the nation in her thrall. She recounted her version of her relationship with Travis Alexander, painting a portrait of him that was unrecognizable to his friends and family. She described their sex life in graphic, often sordid detail, claiming he was a hypocrite who hid his sex-obsessed nature behind a mask of Mormon piety. Then, she escalated her attack on his character, making the shocking and entirely uncorroborated allegation that he harbored pedophilic desires. She testified that his emotional abuse had escalated into physical violence, recounting unverified incidents where he allegedly choked her and broke her finger. Finally, she described the day of the murder, claiming he had attacked her in a violent rage, forcing her to fight for her life. When a juror submitted a question asking her to explain her long history of lying, Arias offered a carefully crafted response. Lying isn't typically something I just do. The lies I've told in this case can be tied directly back to either protecting Travis's reputation or my involvement in his death because I was very ashamed. It was a masterful performance of contrition and justification, an attempt to reframe her deception as a symptom of her trauma. With two diametrically opposed realities presented, the trial became a battleground for psychological experts. The defense called Dr. Richard Samuels, a psychologist who testified that Arias suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of Alexander's abuse. He also diagnosed her with dissociative amnesia, which he argued explained her inability to recall the details of the stabbing. Under a withering cross-examination from Juan Martinez, however, Dr. Samuels' credibility was severely damaged. He was forced to admit that Arias had lied to him repeatedly during his evaluation and that his diagnostic methods were flawed. The prosecution countered with its own expert clinical psychologist, Dr. Janine DeMart. She testified that her evaluation of Arias found no clinical evidence to support a diagnosis of PTSD or amnesia. Instead, she offered a different diagnosis: borderline personality disorder, or BPD. She explained the hallmarks of the condition to the jury: a deep-seated frantic fear of abandonment, a pattern of unstable and intense relationships, inappropriate, intense anger, and a tendency toward manipulative behavior. The BPD diagnosis provided a chillingly coherent framework that seemed to account for the entirety of Arias's behavior, both before and after the murder. It explained the obsessive stalking, the conversion to his religion, and the jealous rage. Crucially, it also explained the calculated, premeditated acts, the staged burglary, the gas cans, the elaborate alibis, that the PTSD diagnosis struggled to address. The jury was left to decide which story was more plausible. Was this the panicked, trauma-induced reaction of a battered woman, or the final, violent outburst of a personality defined by a terror of being left behind? After 4 months of testimony, the case came to a dramatic close. In his closing argument, Juan Martinez delivered a blistering condemnation of Arias, his voice dripping with contempt. He repeatedly used the sarcastic refrain, "It's not her fault," to mock her tendency to blame everyone but herself. He paced before the jury, his anger palpable as gruesome autopsy photos were displayed on a large screen behind him. He told them, "This individual, the defendant, Jodi Arias, killed Travis Alexander. And even after stabbing him over and over, she will not let him rest in peace. But now, instead of a gun, instead of a knife, she uses lies." He concluded by looking directly at the jurors and posing a challenge. "Are you going to allow her to scam you?" is really the question. "Are you going to buy her lies?" Defense attorney Kirk Nurmi followed with a more subdued, almost weary argument. He told the jury that the case was not as simple as the prosecution claimed, but was rather about fear, love, sex, lies, and dirty little secrets. He acknowledged his client's dishonesty, but reminded the jury that she was not on trial for lying. It was then that he made the stunning admission that he didn't even like his own client most of the time, a statement the judge later instructed the jury to disregard. On May 8, 2013, after 15 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. The court clerk read the finding. As to count 1, first-degree murder, guilty. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. The Alexander family wept and hugged one another, while outside the courthouse, a crowd that had gathered daily for months erupted in cheers. The guilty verdict, however, was not the end of the story. The case moved into a penalty phase to determine if Arias should be sentenced to death. On May 15th, the same jury found that the murder had been committed in an especially cruel and heinous manner, making her eligible for execution. Arias then addressed the jury herself, pleading for her life. She acknowledged her previous statements, expressing a preference for death, but said she now had a different perspective. "I can't in good conscience ask you to sentence me to death because of them, my family." The jury deliberated, but could not reach a unanimous decision, deadlocking with an 8-4 vote in favor of death. A mistrial was declared for the penalty phase. Under Arizona law, the state was permitted to impanel a new jury to decide the sentence a second time. In October 2014, another lengthy proceeding began. On March 5, 2015, that jury also deadlocked. This time, the vote was 11-1 in favor of the death penalty. The lone holdout juror later reported receiving death threats after her identity was leaked online. One of the other jurors expressed the majority's frustration, stating, "I feel that the one holdout had her mind made up from the beginning." She alluded that the death penalty would be a form of revenge. With two separate juries failing to reach a unanimous verdict, the death penalty was permanently removed as an option. The final decision fell to Judge Sherry Stevens. On April 13, 2015, nearly 7 years after the murder, she sentenced Jodi Arias to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. The legal case was over, but its toxic legacy endures. The trial stands as a profound cautionary tale about the intersection of justice and mass media in the digital age. The relentless gavel-to-gavel coverage created an environment where public opinion often felt more powerful than legal precedent. Defense expert Alice LaViolette received death threats after her testimony. Kirk Nurmi was pilloried in social media, with one person digitally superimposing his face onto a crime scene photo of Alexander's body. The public's engagement often crossed the line into what one retired judge called an electronic version of a lynch mob. The Arizona Court of Appeals would eventually uphold the conviction based on the overwhelming evidence of her guilt. But it did so while officially recognizing the egregious and self-promoting misconduct of prosecutor Juan Martinez, whose behavior contributed to the media frenzy. The trial became an outlier, a case where lawyers were clearly playing to the camera. In the years since, judges in the region and beyond have become more cautious about granting unfettered media access to high-profile cases. The spectacle of the Jodi Arias trial forced the legal system to confront an uncomfortable truth. In an age of 24/7 coverage, the search for justice can itself become the crime's final, most public, and most damaging act.